Okay, well, I guess I'll start another one of my video blogs. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Paul Hart book and chapter 1. We talked about it a bit in class, and the class, I guess, didn't seem real taken with it. I haven't really gone beyond chapter 1 yet, so I can't comment on the rest. I've heard that the rest is quite good. Chapter 1 I found a little bit circular. I know we discussed in class how it might be building on itself and building on itself, but a lot of one thing I did notice reading it is that a lot of the lists are essentially repeating themselves, and while the lists are, I would say, really important points, I you know, you might have been able to get away with saying them once, but I think the points are worth looking at. Point 1 on page 27, for example, environmental education should consider environment in its totality, natural and man-made, ecological, political, economic, technological, social, legislative, cultural, and aesthetic. I do think this is a good point, and in fact, I've often talked about, just with friends of mine and in conversations and stuff like that, talked about how, they like all this man-made problems and man-made stuff, it's just not natural. Well, technically humans are part of nature, and therefore what they do is natural. That doesn't mean it's healthy or good, but it is natural, and I think it's an important point, and I think it's often lost, not only in education, but just in general, in the general population. The second point talks about environmental education should be a continuous lifelong process, both in and out of school. I don't really think that one necessarily needs any elaboration. It's self-explanatory. It's absolutely true. I don't see how environmental education and your sort of introspective study of how you belong in environment and how environment affects you necessarily stops when you when you're done school or something like that. I mean, it's a ridiculous belief, and of course it doesn't. So it should be a lifelong process. Environmental education should be interdisciplinary in its approach. There again, I think environment influences all aspects of life, and I think it's interdisciplinary by definition. And you talk about, well, do you have an environmental education curriculum, or is it just interwoven between um, classes that already exist? So do you put, I think in class we call it undergirding in the education subjects that are already there. And I mean, I think you almost need to do both, to be honest. And I know that most people are like one or the other, but I'm not sure it has to be one or the other. More importantly, I'm not sure it can be one or the other, because there is a discipline of environmental education too, I would argue. Um, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't influence history. It obviously does, and it doesn't mean that it doesn't influence ELA or uh, any of those things. I mean, there's a very important. I mean, a lot of people look at phys ed or kinesiology or whatever they might want to call it as the nothing subject, but it's a natural to put a unit on the environment in. I mean, so I mean, it's a great place to put some environmental academic content in and stuff like that. And I think it can be done sort of everywhere, even in math classes and stuff like that. I mean, there's an awful lot of algebraic equations and calculus equations and stuff like that figure heavily into scientific uh, calculations, and I mean, there's no reason that you couldn't talk about them as applied processes. Environmental education should emphasize active participation in preventing and solving environmental problems. I worry a little bit about our tendency to want to try and control our environment, preventing problems. I mean, we've caused problems, certainly, and that's something that needs to be looked at and worked on. Um, But when it comes to preventing problems and solving problems especially, we humans were just not good at the big picture, and I think that we have gotten ourselves into more trouble trying to fix our problems than we were in causing the problems in the first place, as many times as not. And so things like that scare me just because we're not good enough at it, and I think we would be better off to perhaps not try and fix our mistakes. Fixing our mistakes often cause more mistakes, and two wrongs don't make a right. That's for sure. So, environmental education should examine major environmental issues from a world point of view while paying due regard to regional differences. I mean, the environment is global, but our individual environments are clearly local, and I mean, I think you get a lot of that. I mean, you talk about global warming and things going strange, and the climate doing strange things and all of these things, and I mean, yes, that is happening to an extent. On the other hand, we've just had a relatively cold summer. Is this the first time we've ever had a cold summer in Canada? No. In Saskatchewan, definitely not. I mean, we've had summers that I've perceived as this cold within living memory. Maybe history will prove me to be wrong, but I'll bet you it's happened before. And if it's happened before, it happened a long time ago. So what was it back in 1827? Or, well, probably not 1827, but my point being, what was it, 100 years ago? What was causing it 100 years ago? Was it global warming then? I mean, I think we have to be conscious of anthropogenic and global changes and stuff like that. However, I think we also need to be conscious that not everything we do is going to make a global impact. Most of what we do as a species make local impacts as we do them, but global impacts do require a huge amount more. And I'm not trying to downplay global warming or climate change, I think is a better word, because I think it's starting to be shown that the warming trend isn't as fast, or maybe even isn't there. Climate change, however, is certainly not an unreasonable hypothesis to hold. Is it going to end up being anthropogenic? Maybe. Aspects of it certainly are. I wouldn't argue that. I mean, I don't think you can argue the fact that we've pumped trillions of tons of pollutants and greenhouse gases and all these things into the atmosphere. It's bound to make a difference. Is it making the difference we think it does? It possibly is, and I think we need to look into that. But I think I would go back to the point I was making about solving our problems and say it's important that the solutions that we come up with don't cause bigger problems than than the problem was to start with. And so we have to be more careful, I think, and the science has to get better. Right now, it's basically one side pitted against the other side, and unfortunately, when things like that happen, that's when scientific discoveries are, unfortunately made up. And we need good science to know if we're doing the right thing or not, and so it's important that we look into that. Environmental education should focus on current and future environmental situations. I think that's been covered in other things I've said, so I'll move on to the next one. Environmental education should examine all development and growth from an environmental perspective. There again, that's just to talk, about integrating it into all aspects of life, basically. And finally, environmental education should promote the value and necessity of local, national, international cooperation with the solution of environmental problems. Well, I've talked about what I consider problems with, quote-unquote, environmental problems, and I mean, that's, it's certainly important. It's important, too, though, that, if we work together, we may make fewer mistakes in our changes, and so maybe we need to look into that, but we have to know we're making fewer mistakes. If we don't know it, then we're just going to screw up the same way we've always screwed up before. I don't know, I'm concerned about some of those ideas. But those are my thoughts on Chapter 1, And I say chapter 1 because even though it's a list from page 27, I mean, these points are sort of rehashed throughout, and they're good points, which is why they're probably talked about again and again and again, but I think we have to question, you know, our individual impacts. If everybody was looking at their impacts individually, the impact globally may be reduced too. And so even though I think international, cooperation is important, I'm not sure that it is everything. Just some of my thoughts for tonight, and I guess my video blog entry number 3, so I guess I'll sign off.